when you come to most of these food manufacturing companies. They're trying to, number one, make money, and number two, they're making food and they want you to eat more of the food. And so if you eat more of the food, you buy more, which means their stock increases in value. But buying more of the food and eating more of the food has nothing to do with the health of the nation.
You're listening to the Holistic Nootropics Podcast, your home for holistic, evidence-based cognitive enhancement strategies. And now your host, Eric Levi.
Dr. D, thank you so much for joining me today on the Holistic Nootropics Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be able to talk to a different group, you know?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you because you have such a interesting, diverse background and practice. You're a PhD, you're a doctor, you're functional medicine, you do nutritional therapy, and you're a chef.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe kind of take me back in how you got interested in this field of nutrition and kind of how it took you through to gaining all of these different concentrations.
Sure. Well, I started out as an engineering student, came home from college because that wasn't really the right place for me, was working in a restaurant, and then decided to go to culinary school. Got accepted by the CAA, and of course that is the most prestigious culinary school in the world. Went there, worked as a chef in Westchester County, New York, then moved back to where I was from, which was the Boston area, and finished up got a bachelor's degree in food service management, was working in restaurants, thinking about going to grad school. And I said to somebody, boy, if I could do anything I wanted, I would go to school for nutrition. My friend said, well, why wouldn't you do that? I'm like, well, I don't know. I guess I should do that. But you know, when you're in your 20s, you don't think like I can actually do what I want. You think I need to do what I should do.
That sounds like a very Boston friend. Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, exactly. So I went, started along that path, found out that to practice with a credential, I needed to become a registered dietitian. So I became a registered dietitian and earned my master's degree in food science and human nutrition. So I brought in that food science aspect, which really is like a, advanced form of like what's happening in cooking, because of course it's applying heat to food and acids to food and enzymes and reactions. And then I was teaching at Johnson & Wales University, teaching chefs, because at that time my goal was, let's just teach the chefs this stuff. Part of why I became interested in nutrition was because it was what I did on my own. I was always into health. I was into exercise and working out, and I wouldn't eat any of the things I made in most of the restaurants I worked at. They just didn't fit into my diet. So my idea was to teach chefs this. Somewhere along the way, I earned my PhD, and I studied spirituality and weight loss maintenance. And my dissertation was an investigation of people who had maintained a weight loss for more than 2 years, 20% of their body weight, and I investigated their spiritual factors. Well, obviously now, everyone talks about spirituality, but back then we didn't. We didn't equate that into being a parameter of health. And so it was kind of unique. I also had started a private practice and worked as an adjunct private practice for many years in Florida. And then when I moved up to Georgia, where I am now, along the way, your clients change based upon who you're involved with. So when I had babies, I was seeing moms, for mom nutrition. But then it sort of switched into this whole idea of functional nutrition. People were coming to me, it wasn't called that then, but they wanted to use herbs, they wanted to use spices, they wanted to use more natural medicines. And of course, because I had the food background, my food piece was always much stronger than other practitioners. So then when I moved up here is when I got certified with the IFM. I worked through that program, developed curriculums at universities. I developed a whole bachelor's degree in culinary nutrition. I really see that looking at the food people eat is where we need to be. And I think many people, because of food marketing and these multinational corporations and the amount of money they spend on advertising and the amount of money they spend on researching how to get people to eat more food, it has nothing to do with our body and making our bodies healthier. But food does. So I use the expression I have, say, you have to use food as food before you can use food as medicine. So if you're eating processed foods, you're eating packaged foods, you're not preparing your own food, you're trusting a restaurant, then until you get back and prepare your own food from ingredients, then you really can't move forward with this whole medicine piece.
I love it. You just said so much stuff that's in alignment with the things that not only do I think, but I work with clients on and I write about, and I think is such a huge piece of the puzzle that is missing from all of these conversations, especially around like these diet wars, like what's the diet today? Are we doing keto today? Are we doing paleo? Is it vegan? Is it vegetarian? Is it lacto-ovo vegetarian? And is it the GAPS diet? Is it the DASH diet? Is it the South Beach? Is it the Jenny Craig? Macronutrients, while they are important, are not as important as the actual ingredients of the food and the way it's prepared.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point when it comes to the macros, because I think, okay, so take the field of nutrition by itself. So we made a big mistake in the 80s chasing fat as being negative. But the problem wasn't so much people eating excessive fat. It was that everybody switched it out to not just have carbohydrates, to be eating refined carbohydrates. So that wasn't the answer. The answer was always more complex carbohydrates and whole grains. But the message that the public got and the message that was pushed with the food that was sold was these refined carbohydrates. So yeah, now you have all of these diets across the board. And people will ask me, well, which one do you think is the best? And I think it goes beyond the individual diets to the individual person. So what's the best for me? What's the best for you? Okay, I think I'm a couple years older than you and I'm female, you're male. So why would we have the identical nutritional needs? I work out with weights every day. Maybe you do yoga. Okay, so I'm trying to build muscle mass. So maybe my protein needs would be larger than yours. Maybe you have a family history of like rampant, horrible cancer, in which case you need to worry about mitigating that. No one in my family has cancer. Lots of heart disease, though. And so when you look at these individual factors and what a person should be eating, it needs to be based on a lot of personalized factors. But then there's other things that come into it, which we get into lifestyle and we get into the food itself. So right now, nobody would argue that we treat animals the best way we should, right? And as far as for meat manufacturing. So you have a lot of vegans who jump onto that idea of being a vegan. Well, that's more of for a social, political, or personal philosophical reason for eating that way. They're not wrong. But then you do get vegans who need to pay more attention to the protein that they're eating in plants. And then you get what I find, because I see a lot of women that are middle-aged, 45 to 65. Well, they've been vegan, vegetarian, on and off, and they're good at it. They know how to do it. They're not worrying about anything because when they first learned about it, they paid attention. So you have all these factors that come into play. And I don't think we can just separate out, say one is better, one is worse. And the point you bring up about how you prepare the food, well, 100%. If you're grilling everything over charcoal, that is not good. If you're taking a whole chicken and you're using the whole chicken, you're getting the collagen from the chicken, maybe you use the bones to make bone broth when you're done, and you get 3 or 4 meals out of one chicken. How is that wrong? It's not. And using your meat more as a condiment sometimes. So I think there's so many issues that go into like, what is the one right way to do it? I mean, it just really, it's not clear cut at all.
Yeah. And I also think there's something to be said about like the seasons of your life. Like you're not the same person today that you were 6 months ago, that you were a year ago, that you were 10 years ago. So a diet that worked for you in your environment, assuming you haven't been living in the same place, doing the same thing, interacting with the same people for 10, 20 years. And I know there's people who do that, but even those people, like there's so many factors that go into your own biochemistry to not
and
honor that.
Environment, right?
Yeah. The conversation is so convoluted. And I love what you're saying, that it really comes down to honoring your own, I say this all the time, bio-individuality, honor your own season of life. And then at the end of the day, cook the food the right way. Because in the end, that makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is individualized. And you bring up a point of sleep. It's a whole lifestyle. So one of the things I'll be in a group, I'll be talking to 200 people and I'll say, so who has a water bottle in here? Everyone holds one up. They said, okay, who went running this morning? Some people. Who went running, who exercised in the gym? Who lives near a farm? Who lives near the city? I said, okay, so we've just established out of these 200 people, there's different inputs of air and different inputs of water, right? That's the simplest way of looking at it. You know, so then you have the food you ate. You have everything you've been exposed to through your entire life, which is your exposome. And so we know things like thoughts, psychological stress can create physiological stress. It can manifest as inflammation. So having this negative environment in your mind can manifest as inflammation. So all of this input, where if you're pretty healthy mentally, you're running, you breathe in some exhaust, you just detoxify it. Well, some people who aren't able to detoxify can have a buildup of all these toxins in their body, creating inflammation everywhere. And so when we say, what does one person need and what does somebody else need? We have to really look at that deep level and then look at people. Like, you know, you mentioned sleep. People just don't realize it. The sleep, the relaxation, the exercise, that's not because you're supposed to do it. It's because that's the way our bodies were designed to operate optimally. And you take inflammation, usually the first place people see that is they see inflammation in their gut. So there's some bloating, there's some gas, there's some diarrhea. They're not absorbing. When people come in to see me, you can look at their hair, their skin, their nails. And what you can tell from that is, after you talk about what they ate, did they digest it? Did they absorb it? Did they assimilate it? Were they able to make the new skin cells? Well, if their skin's a mess, if their hair is brittle and broken, if they don't have good fingernails, it's like, well, they weren't able to build back their body with the food that they took in. So you bring up now, like, let's throw that veganism back in here. Well, hair, skin, nails, everything, all that's structural. So having adequate protein, and yes, you can get adequate protein in a vegan. I mean, we know that. We're not arguing that, but we're kind of, I think, trying to bring up the point that there might be a physiological need to have some good quality biological value protein in your diet to enhance your body's health. So you need good protein quality for the immune system. So you look at what's going on right now with COVID-19. Why are some people more susceptible? Well, people who have comorbidities. Well, maybe they're obese, maybe they have heart disease, they're diabetic, but they also could have underlying inflammation. So they could look like they're perfectly healthy, but they're not, because they have underlying inflammation. And so therefore their immune system is not primed for optimal function. And so I think that, you know, the biochemical individuality, I think, is really the conversation that people need to understand, because I think that, you know, it's not, well, so-and-so says go keto. Well, you can't stay keto forever. So-and-so says go vegan. You know what? It's tough to stay vegan. You know, you really have to think about it. I mean, although it's easier now than it was 10 years ago. Because with my kids, when they were younger, you know, going through puberty, we were more on the vegetarian vegan side just to stay clear of those hormones. I think it's much easier now, but I think it's still, the conversation needs to be, what does each individual need? Which is why practitioners who practice functionally are extremely vital to our, you know, whatever kind of healthcare system emerges post-COVID.
Yeah, and the inflammation piece is, it's like the invisible, I don't know. It's like the boogeyman.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also because inflammation sneaks up on you. I talk a lot about the continuum. It goes from, like, in this direction, you're being optimally healthy. In this direction, you're leading toward disease. So inflammation is making you go in the direction towards some sort of disease or dysfunction or dysregulation. And you have to, I think a lot of people self-medicate for exactly the reasons you were saying. People think, well, this is how I feel now. And because it sneaks up on you, you say, oh, well, I'm 5 years older now, so of course maybe I'm going to be a little tired. Well, why is it that age would be equated with having less energy? I tell people, we live out here in Georgia, it's rural. There's nice trees. Squirrels go up and down, up and down. I'm like, which ones are old? You can't tell, because they're still extremely active. They all look with the same vitality. And so you look at this detoxification, you have to look at, how does your body work? Well, people want to go like on a detox diet, and they think, well, I'm going to just, buy one of these products. But first off, you put food in your body, And then whatever you want out of your body, you have ways to get rid of it. So you can respire when you run, you breathe out. You can sweat. You can urination. Your urine is where you take the metabolic waste out of your body. So having plenty of water, drinking water is not like this fake thing or this diet trick. It's like the more water you drink, you can dilute whatever is your metabolic waste, and it can pass through your kidneys and you can pee it out much easier. Then you go to your liver. Well, your liver is designed to detoxify certain substances. It's designed to turn them from fat soluble into water soluble and then allow you to excrete it. Well, in order to do that, you need to have optimal nutrition to support the function of the liver. And then when you take something and make it from fat soluble and turn it into something water soluble, you need lots of antioxidants there to make sure you don't create more problems in your body. Well, where does this come from? This comes from primarily the fruits and vegetables that have the phytochemicals. Those are what can act as the antioxidants to support liver function. But you also need, because enzymes, the liver function, what you're doing is you're using enzymes. All enzymes are made out of protein. So we go back to that, well, your protein status. Okay, so if you need to make some hair or some skin or an enzyme to detoxify your liver, or you need to make some insulin just to function normally, what's your body going to triage? What's your body going to pick? Probably make the insulin first, right? Probably forget about the liver, definitely forget about the hair. So when people are thinking, well, I'm not functioning optimally, first you need those good ingredients, but get really digging back to going through and searching for each individual patient. Well, what's going wrong with them? And you have a lot of functional tests you can order to figure these things out, or you can take a really good health history and you can find out what people are exposed to. I had a client once, we just couldn't figure out. She was clearly having an issue detoxifying something. And then one day, just chatting, she made a comment about her husband and his clothes, and she tripped over, I think she tripped over the basket next to the bed. I said, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, the laundry basket, he has to wash his uniform every night. And I'm like, well, what does he do? Well, he works in a tire factory. Mm-hmm. Huh. And he puts his clothes next to your bed every night. And we are searching for months to figure out what you're trying to detoxify. Well, obviously, it's all whatever chemicals were coming home on those clothes. She moved it. Literally within a couple weeks, we were able to start getting her body working. And people, you say your environment and things that you can't control. So she could control where she put that, right? But, she couldn't control, make him quit his job kind of control. But there are, just walking out and breathing, so many things that people are exposed to. So helping people to, figure out what they need to do to detoxify, what they need to do to eliminate the inflammation. You have the whole lining of the gut. And the lining of the gut should have nice tight junctures where there's the villi and then there's microvilli, and you have single, cells can be absorbed, single molecules. Well, if a gut's inflamed, becomes leaky, and everyone throws around this leaky gut. Well, what leaky gut means is things that shouldn't pass through. So from your mouth to your anus is this big tube, almost like you're like a donut. If you think about it, what goes in is not in your body. It has to pass through to get into your body. And so this inflammation allows things to pass through that shouldn't be there, that can cause inflammation elsewhere. And you have the connection between your gut and your brain. So this healthy gut with tight junctures means that the microorganisms there are making the metabolites they need to support the brain. So you get this breakdown, any of those places, and that connection is gone. And then this is where a lot of these more psychosocial manifestations come up that seem very elusive, like, how is what I'm eating relating to my anxiety? Well, it's directly related, probably.
Yeah, that's why I love whenever I work with somebody, I give them a food and mood journal. So, for 3 days, what they'll do is they'll write down, and I'm kind of hard on them. And I think I lose a lot of business because I ask people to do this, and it's such a chore for people because it really makes you face your demons, that you didn't even know existed, like I'll give somebody this food and mood journal and I say, okay, I want you to just in these time frames in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, I want you to tell me everything you eat. And I mean, like, I don't need to know like every ingredient that goes into a thing, but if you have a salad, I want to know everything in that salad.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a burger, I want to know everything on that burger. You don't have to tell me if it's like romaine lettuce or if it's, you know, if it's an organic tomato. I don't care about that, but just tell me as much as you can about this. And then I want to know how you feel in that time period, right? Not like directly after, but like in a 3 hour block. Like, okay, in the morning I had a Pop-Tart, right? And then about noontime, I started feeling really anxious. Okay. And that happens 3 days in a row. And then we can go back and now we have the empirical data and we say, look, you see this anxiety that's crushing you right now? It might have something to do with the food you ate in the morning, or that it seems to always follow the same kind of food that you have. And when people start to see that, I think above whatever functional test I do, whatever lab test I do, that is a very powerful tool because now they've wrote it themselves. Like I didn't manipulate anything. I just showed them like, look, you see what you wrote here? It's connected. Mm-hmm. It could be connected to this. And then that's when people's brain, it just flips on its head and they go, oh, so you mean the food I eat? And then like in your case, the environment, the clothes in the hamper, do you mean that stuff can affect the way I feel? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have a very good point. So you used in your example, Pop-Tarts. There's, processed foods and then there's ultra-processed foods. And ultra-processed foods are foods that are made whose ingredients are processed. So you think about a Pop-Tart, your refined sugar, some sort of whatever jelly type filling. The Pop-Tart itself, the ingredients are processed foods. So that is so far away from whole, real foods. And I find with people, we talk a lot about adding plants to the diet. And for many people who are on, a traditional American style diet, they're not used to eating a lot of plants. I find that this is where herbs and spices really can make a phenomenal difference with people, because herbs and spices can be used to heal the gut first. They can be antimicrobial. They can be anti-inflammatory, which of course the anti-inflammatory aspect helps inflammation everywhere. But they can work as prebiotic fiber, which means they can feed the microorganisms in the gut. And then some spices can be put into probiotic preparation. So you can take people who have, like I'd say someone who's eating a Pop-Tart probably isn't necessarily even trying to be healthy, because you would think people know the Pop-Tart's unhealthy. But, I actually have this conversation quite a bit with students, with people in my life. It's like, no, people think it's food because it's sold at the grocery store. But a Pop-Tart's really, it's not even processed food. It's ultra processed food. It's like way out on the spectrum of what could be wrong with something you're eating. So yeah, that's a pro-inflammatory food. And then given that it's lacking nutrients other than sugar and for calories, it's really going to cause a person, it's feeding the bad kind of bacteria, it's pro-inflammatory, and it's not really going to do anything. And if a person has some sort of dysregulation going on, that's feeding dysregulation rather than mitigating it,
Right. And on a Pop-Tart box, I've seen it before, it says low fat. So people are like, oh, okay, then it must be good for me. I mean, it can't be that bad. I know it's not food. I know it's not found in nature anywhere, but if it's low fat, I guess it won't make me fat. And fat is the problem with health. So, 2 and 2 equals 4. So, I grew up, eating a lot of cereal and it's when you just look at the numbers, of how much cereal is sold, how many Pop-Tarts are sold. Why is General Mills a multi-billion-dollar organization, right? They don't make anything good. So this money is going somewhere. It's going into the mouths of so many Americans and international people. So for, it is obvious to me now, but back, a couple, even just like 5-6 years ago, it's like, I would look at a box of Special K, right? And Special K is like the flakes with the little fruit chunks. You're like, well, it's got fruit chunks, so it's gotta be good. Right. Yeah. And then people don't, because they think they're eating something healthy, they're like, well, this depression I have, it can't be tied to my diet because I eat Special K raspberry chunks, so it's got to be, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It's very confusing.
It's extremely confusing. That's what I mean when I say people go to the grocery store and they think that what's sold in there is food.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to get people back to the idea that food are ingredients. And you bring up a really good point. It's like companies that make food, they design food so that people will eat more of it. It's not designed to be optimally healthy. I think it's like a happy accident if food ends up having some sort of nutritive redemption to it. When you come to most of these food manufacturing companies, they're trying to, number one, make money, and number two, they're making food and they want you to eat more of the food. And so if you eat more of the food, you buy more, which means their stock increases in value. But buying more of the food and eating more of the food has nothing to do with the health of the nation. And so you look at things, yes, like Special K is a really good example. It's sold as a cereal. It's not even sold as a kid's cereal, but it has, you have the idea that it might be more of a healthier version of cereal. It still isn't what would be optimal. It's not a whole food. I wouldn't put it in that category at all. And it's a processed food. And so I think it's very difficult for a lot of people because of the marketing. And then also when you look at these, a lot of these snacks, like the potato chips and the crunchy, salty things, those are really designed to have the optimal crunch. So when somebody crunches and bites it, it has a certain sound. They actually have narrowed it down to what is the best sound of the density and the crunch of the chip. And then, of course, it has on it spices, and you don't know what's in those spices. It can have MSG, which isn't by itself not inherently bad, but when you're eating it and you don't know you're eating it, I wouldn't recommend that. And the spices, the flavorings are designed to cause you to want to crave more. And that's not about health. That's about eating. And they're two different pieces of the conversation. So yeah, it is very difficult for clients sometimes to really understand, and that what they've been doing all along that they actually were trying to do and thought was good is really not even remotely good. It's a very confusing time right now. And then you throw into it what we were talking about earlier of these diets. It's like, it's extremely confusing. Well, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Well, what you're doing is wrong. Well, I can't figure out if I should be vegan or keto, so I'll stay where I am.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because so the Pop-Tarts and the cereal, I think that's a no-brainer, right? But I think what starts to get a little weird, and I've noticed since I've become a practitioner myself, is that these foods that we consider health foods, they're on a spectrum, right? Like not every health food is good for everybody, right? So like spinach, for example, is a real interesting thing I've been thinking a lot about in the last couple months when I started to dive into oxalates and oxalic acid. And there's a lot of science that shows that oxalates are devastating to the body. Every food has them, but it's how much are you getting over how long of a time? Like they store in the body, and eventually they get to the point where you've had so many, they start causing problems. And the most obvious one is typically kidney stones. And then you look at the foods that are the highest in oxalates, and it's spinach, chard, beets, almonds, these foods that, we all think are healthy. And believe me, for a long time when I was vegan, I was low fat, even since I've been, more omnivore and paleo, is like these foods were a big part of my diet. I was telling clients for a long time, eat beets because it's great for your gallbladder, right? And it's such a very high oxalate food. And, a lot of health people and professionals I know deal with their own health issues, myself included. And a lot of it is due sometimes to these health foods. So I think it does come down to your bio-individuality, even getting like these food sensitivity tests. I think an organic acids test is great. Like you said, the metabolism is showed in the urine. But it's a journey, and you can't, like you said, distill it down to this is the diet, these are the foods, and everything else, because then you soon find that, oh, wow, now I've developed skin issues when I didn't have skin issues. Now I've got sleep issues when I didn't have sleep issues. And it's just about being, in the end, it's really about being mindful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a very strong mind-body connection. And so it goes both ways. You have your gut-brain connection, but you have your brain-gut connection. And so having everything be in sync, having your gut optimally healthy so that you're producing like say short chain fatty acids that are beneficial to your brain, but having your brain, having your, how you feel, your behavior, so you're not becoming anxious. Maybe you have, you're prone to anxiety. Well, learning to calm yourself means that you're going to send the signal to your gut that you're calm, and then your gut can stay in harmony. And then you want your heart in harmony with everything, because of course we know that the heart energy is connected to everything. And so when we look at people like that, you can really help to figure out, well, what is it that each individual needs? But I tell you what, there's probably not anyone who's come in my office who we didn't need to start with their gut right off. I mean, you bring up a point about the oxalates and kidney stones, but, you're going to find, people aren't eating so many, beet greens and spinach that they're, developing stones. In more cases, there's something else going on. I've seen that where they're developing kidney stones. When they do, we can cut out the oxalates to try to mitigate it, but something else is usually going on there. But it's all very fascinating, because if you don't look at people individually, you don't get this full picture of how to promote their health.
Yeah, and the gut thing is that's where I start. It all starts in the gut. I mean, I'm always looking at like the HPA axis, and I'm looking at toxicity, but at the end, it's the gut. And then, most people I think in the country are dealing with some level of a gut issue. I mean, how can you not look how much food we eat? Of course you're going to have some kind of gut issue. The stress plays into it, but the gut is really where it begins and why it's so important.
Well, I'm going to back it up a little bit and say you have to select the food you're going to prepare and prepare the food yourself, and then sit down and eat it. Because if you're controlling what you take in and you control the environment, there's something we teach, we call it mindful eating, the idea that you're paying attention to what you eat. But it begins, and I think the mindful eating begins with the selecting of the food in the grocery store, the planning what you're going to make, because you're planning to eat food, you're planning to make a meal. You can make one meal twice a week, and eat for 3 days, then eat for 4 days. And so I'm not saying you sit there every night, but then sitting while you're eating, not eating over the sink, or like warming it up out of the microwave and then quickly shoveling it in while you're standing there watching the news, sitting down, eating. And yes, if you can eat with somebody else, that's wonderful. I have a back porch, and it's up in the tree line just because of the way the property is. So when I sit on the back porch, I see all the birds. I'm not eating with anyone. I'm eating by myself. But you know what? There's nature there. There's certain birds that I know they're talking to me when they see me come out there, because I'm the only one that's there. And so I'm definitely connecting with something outside of myself. Is it wonderful and beautiful if you can connect with other people? Yes, but you don't necessarily have to. You can connect with plants. There's an energy there. In the garden, go outside, there's grass. Connect with the energy in the universe that's there in front of you. If you're doing this while you're eating, it becomes, like almost a meditation in motion. Some disciplines will talk about like a walking meditation, but I believe you can have all of those elements in there while you're sharing a meal. And so if you are sharing it with someone you love, that's even better. That makes it even more healing, if you will. And it's healing for the other person who gets your energy, and then you receive theirs, which is love, going back and forth. You can call it energy, love, whatever you want. So I think it's really, we have to just take a step above, like we started the conversation with the macros. It's like, that's like the least of it,
Yeah. You hitting on this idea that cooking your own food is so important. Like, I know so many people, and of course everything's been different since this whole quarantine situation, but and I do think that it's been good for some people, because now it's like you've been almost forced to learn how to cook your own food. You can't go to restaurants. Yeah. And I love a good restaurant. I love, I'm not a foodie per se, but I love trying new food. There's days I just want to sit down and just try a food I've never tried and have it made in a way, or something I like, made in a way by a chef who's a pro like you, and it's made with all these great spices. But what it always comes back to for me is when I think about what oil are they using back there? What sugar, what salt? And because I cook so much myself, like these things are on the forefront of my mind. It's like you could use these great ingredients. You could make it. You could be a classically trained chef, but the second you throw canola oil on a pan and you start cooking, you just ruined everything. And I think a lot of people who eat out, and even if you go for the quote unquote healthy choice, it's like I used to do walking tours in New York City. And every couple days in New York, I'd take tours through Chinatown, right? And every time I go through Chinatown, it'd be like 11, 12 in the afternoon, just before everything opens up. They're kind of putting everything together for the day. You just see these guys walking with giant, barrels of vegetable oil. And it's like, I mean, I love Chinese food. Who doesn't love Chinese food? But man, like that is the element that makes it so toxic to people. The second you heat that stuff up, I mean, it goes in your body, and you talk about inflammation. It's like that is just poison to your body. So, I think it's about balance, really.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you my example that I like to tell people all the time. P.F. Chang's lettuce wraps. And you've got all these people who are paleo or keto, and they're like, oh, I'll have the lettuce, and it's just wrapped with the chicken. Well, it's really sweet. If you go to P.F. Chang's, most of the recipes are super sweet, which means they have some sort of sugar in it and salt. But P.F. Chang's lettuce wraps have 68 grams of sugar in it. 68 grams, right?
I've always thought they tasted a little sweet. That's so interesting.
So you're eating like an appetizer that's made with meat and a vegetable, but look at the sugar that you have in there. And so, yeah, you're right. It means the sodium is one aspect. Of course, everything in a restaurant is way more salt than you would put in at home. The quality of the oil, 100%. And then if they're reusing the oil for frying and not changing it nightly, that's another issue. Then just doing a simple saute in oil, what kind of oil it is. And then the amount of sugar that's in it, because sugar, fat, and salt are what we know are three things that are, exciting for the palate to make people enjoy food. But the problem you have is with many restaurants is they go down to the lowest common denominator, the least expensive version of creating something. Again, it's not about making you healthier. Very few restaurants, that's what they have in mind, So yeah, I mean, making your own food is definitely less expensive than dining out. And it's also always, no matter what you make at home, it's healthier than what you purchase out. I mean, there's just, no matter what it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you're talking about salt, and salt has also been demonized in the mainstream, but I think we both know that salt isn't always bad. When it comes to salt, what are your thoughts? Because I go back and forth with this. Like, I know table salt is not good, but there are forms of salt that are good. You see people with the pink Himalayan salt, you hear sea salt. It's an electrolyte and it's needed by your body, but I hear a lot of different things about how much is good. Is it about ratios? Is it about combination? In full disclosure, I wake up in the morning, I drink 3 cups of water and I put salt in there, and it's been one of my best health hacks I've ever done. So, but I also know that if it was like table salt from a Chinese restaurant or something, it would be a totally different thing.
Well, I think that there's, you have to clarify. So salt, sugar, salt, sweet, salty, sour, and bitter, our basic tastes are physiologically there for a reason. So salt is there physiologically to prompt us to consume things that have salt in it so that we were provided with electrolytes. So you need sodium in your body, and you need it because you have the sodium, potassium, ATPase pump, which is how you're going to create energy in your body. So you need sodium for your body to function. The problem comes in when you go and you dine out commercially or when you buy packaged food, is that sodium is added in extra amounts for either preservative factor or to increase the flavor. So when you're cooking at home, yes, you can add salt to the food you're cooking at home. And you made the question about what type of salt. Well, regular old quote-unquote table salt is probably not the most optimal choice. However, table salt does have iodine in it. And because we've demineralized our soil to a certain extent, there are people running around who don't get adequate iodine. And so I would say they shouldn't be eating table salt necessarily, but that was something that was iodized salt was put into the American diet so that people would have adequate iodine. You have Himalayan salt, you have gray salt, like French gray salt, you have sea salts from different seas. If you go out to the Pacific Northwest, all these stores will have their own sea salts, like from this place and that place, like they make them themselves. And so what I find is once you step away from table salt, why would you use these other salts? Well, some of them have different mineral profiles, so you'll get some trace minerals in there. But ultimately, it comes down to taste. And so I have all sorts of salt sitting there. I have two little, I guess you call them lazy Susans, that are filled with spices. And the salts are in there, and I just select the one that I think will complement what I'm preparing. And so that is how I select the salt. But as far as taste goes, my preference is it's a salt, and I can't even think of what it is. It's from Camargue, France, Camargue. It comes in a little container, and to me, it's the most delicious, delicate salt. It's a sea salt, naturally dried, so the water, comes up on the cliffs, and then it creates these pools, and it's naturally dried there. And so to me, that is the salt that really I think is has the most balanced flavor and is very I don't find it to have anything negative about it.
Yeah.
I was going to say salt's a different one. So you need salt, and I'm just going to take a point to mention. So I created a rehydration beverage because of the fact that I was I did develop hyponatremia once when I was hiking in the Grand Canyon, which means I drank so much water that I diluted and washed all the salt out of my body. So I created this rehydration beverage. It's called R3, and it has sodium in it, sodium, potassium, sodium chloride, potassium, magnesium, and it's all balanced. So when you drink it, and what people say is the water stays in, it sticks, they don't feel thirsty, they feel hydrated. It helps people, it has calcium fructoborate in it, and which is fruit XB, and it has sustamine in it, both of which are anti-inflammatory. So we have people who are using it like for headaches, people are using it for arthritis because it is great for reducing inflammation after a workout. You did say earlier, remember you said some inflammation is good. So the inflammation when you work out, that's what you're doing. You're working out with weights, you create some inflammation so that your body has to heal those rips and tears. But too much inflammation after working out isn't good either. So we, my partner and I created this beverage. It's called Revitalize Pro. It's called R3. And, it's that balance of electrolytes that helps people.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say make the water stick, and that's something I appreciate now because I drink a lot of water. I grew up in Arizona, and I grew up. I was a lifeguard for a long time, and just sitting at a pool when it's 115 degrees for months on end, you just learn to build this habit of drinking a lot of water. And I didn't realize that I was doing exactly what you say, which is I was literally flushing minerals out of my body. And now I'm older, I appreciate minerals more, but now I see the difference when I was telling you this before, I'll go in a sauna and I'll drink a lot of water, work out, I'll jump in the sauna for 20, 30 minutes. It gets hot, I sweat, and I can go down one of two paths. I can come home and just drink a bunch of water, carry on as usual. I'll feel pretty drained for the day, but I'll take an electrolyte formulation, and it's like I'm back in the game, and it's kind of one of those amazing things that when you're tuned into your body, you can feel the difference. So, and it's a great example of, kind of finding fortune through struggle there, becoming, sweating out all your electrolytes and then developing this product that would have been very helpful at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, it would have been very helpful. But, you make a point about going in the sauna. So you go in the sauna and you sweat, but what you're also doing is you're detoxifying. So you're using, the water and the minerals. You're using all of that to pull toxins out of your body as well. So when you come out, if you do drink some sort of electrolyte replacement, it's like you're replenishing everything in a balanced form. And I don't think people really appreciate that balanced electrolytes because people consume a lot of processed food, there's a lot of sodium in it, which does create this feeling of being thirsty. But then you have your plants, which are providing your potassium and magnesium to balance everything out. And so once you sweat it all out, it's like you replenish it in a balanced form, and then you do feel great. You feel excellent. You feel very clear-headed. You feel energetic.
Yeah, the mineral balance is the thing, and this comes back to people being their own biochemist, and they're like, I'm going to supplement with calcium, and I'm going to supplement with magnesium, and I'm going to supplement with potassium, and these things, they don't work. They work in ratios. They kind of work synergistically with each other, and these different ratios represent, how your thyroid's functioning. They affect your adrenals. They affect your gut. They affect your liver. So you're right. If it's not pre-formulated in a way that you're getting the optimum amount relative to the other minerals, then you could throw off those balances, and you might take a problem and make it worse. So,
yeah. Well, absolutely. There's a lot of that going around. A lot of people who are just stirring up their own electrolyte formulas. And I'm not sure where that comes from, but I hear this. I hear it from some students. I've heard it from, and I'm not sure who's promoting that idea that you need to be buying all your electrolytes separately. What really, ideally, you want either to buy something that's already balanced or to be eating food and having it naturally come from food, because that would be where it would come from in nature. And even when you go back to the idea of meat, meat has a lot of different minerals in it in a balanced form. And so when you're eating a small amount of meat, I've had clients like moms who wanted to be vegetarian and were really against meat eating, but then their kids were becoming anemic. I'm like, you know what? I said, you buy, a pound of meat and cut it into 4 portions and then feed your child 2 ounces of that. You eat the other 2 ounces. Do that a couple times a week, therapeutically. Think about what's in it. And we're designed to eat everything. The problem is it's our system. It's not the meat eating itself. It's the animal husbandry. It's the warehousing of animals. It's all of that's the problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Not the meat. The hormones, the antibiotics, the feed that's contaminated with fertilizers and pesticides. That's the problem.
I agree, 100%. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I can talk about food for hours, and food and health. And I think this has been very informative. I think anybody listening definitely has taken some gems from this, whether it's the minerals, whether it's the preparation of the food, whether it's, the idea of the food affecting gut health. I think you've definitely dropped some gems. I'm certainly appreciative of your time, Dr. D. Just to kind of wrap things up, if you could tell the listeners or viewers a good place to find you if they want to find, some of your work, some of your writings, if they would like to work with you, where would you send somebody?
Okay, well, my website is Dr. D Nutrition, and actually right now I'm offering a free Food is Medicine webinar. So when you go onto the webpage, it's either going to pop up or go across the banner on the top. But I have recipes, I have blog posts, there's links to videos, I link to culinary videos, there's articles that are linked to. There's a lot of information there that touches on everything I've been talking about. So and then you can get in touch with me there. I offer a free 15-minute consultation. I do work virtually. So if somebody wanted to make that 15-minute conversation, we basically find out if we'd be a good fit to work together. And, people either fit and we work together, or they don't fit and we don't work together. But right now, that free webinar, it's on Food is Medicine. It's kind of encapsulates a lot of what I've talked about today, and 10 easy steps. There's a nice, beautiful PDF you can print out with all the steps on there, hang it on the refrigerator. It's people are liking it.
Awesome. And then that electrolyte, the R3, is that available on the website as well? Or?
Yeah, that's on the website in the store, but it also has its own website, revitalizepro.com. And this coming up on the summer, we've just found so many people who play tennis, people who do all kinds of different sports, but then also the migraines and the inflammation. We just get a lot of really good comments on it.
That's great. So we'll link to all that. Oh, yeah.
I was going to say it tastes really good too.
Yeah, that's important. We'll link to all that in our show notes, which will be on holisticnootropics.com/podcast. Dr. D, this is great. Before we sign off, do you have any parting words, anything you'd like to say before we close out that you'd like to leave our Holistic Nootropics viewers and listeners with?
Well, I guess I'd just say, everybody talks about self-care now, and planning your food, preparing your food, feeding yourself food that is healthy is the ultimate form of self-care. It connects you to the environment. If you're conscious of the food you're preparing, it can connect you to the people you're sharing the meal with. And if you select your foods, you're voting with your dollar, and we can all change the food system together.
Absolutely. That's great. I love it. I 100% believe what you're saying. Vote with your dollar. We could transform this whole thing. So, and then we can improve the country's health. So, Dr. D, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. This has been very, very enlightening, and maybe we'll have you back sometime for a round 2.
Oh, I'd love it. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, viewer and listener, for checking out the Holistic Nootropics podcast. For the show notes to this podcast, go on over to holisticnootropics.com/podcast. And for all things nootropics, head on over to holisticnootropics.com. For me and Dr. D, thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for listening. For more brain-boosting info, in-depth articles, and show notes, check out holisticnootropics.com.